just gonna look at that.
Here, as far from me.
Do you want us to sit? I don't, I often get confused about what's best for you, Mr. Chair,
Alan, can you hit that?
about where we sit.
I think, even though it's a little strange, I can hear fine, so you may, you could choose for yourself, but the witness chair is fine.
Okay.
Like, let's
Do you
just.
prefer if you're with or
We
without?
are live. We are live.
Right.
Doesn't matter.
Okay, Ryan, take that chair up.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. It's Friday, April 29th, 8:36 a.m. This is a meeting of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee, and we are resuming work on H715, an act relating to clean heat standard. And we're here this morning to hear a proposed amendment from Senator Hinsdale and others prior to hearing it, prior to having it go to the floor. With that, Senator Hinsdale and Senator Polina, I don't know, you can use the opportunity if you want to tag team it, or one. The floor is yours. If you could just talk to us about the amendment and what you're trying to do. Thank you.
Yes. So for the record, Senator Keisha Hinsdale, Chittenden County.
Senator Anthony Polina, Washington County.
We wish you well, Mr. Chair and Mr. Vice Chair. So we'll start there. Hopefully this is a mild illness. We have before you an amendment that looks different than the one from yesterday. So it is in your it is on your website. It is a draft 5.1. There is a paper copy too on your desk, Senator. So I'm going to take this paper copy. There were, I think, as I said on the floor yesterday, and Senator Polina made his own remarks, so I'll let him speak to it as well. We are setting a North Star for a very, very important program so that we all are rowing in the same direction and have a sense of where we ultimately want to be. And I understand that there are transition fuels and ways that we need to use our existing infrastructure to get there. But as I also remarked, all of these clean heat measures are not created equal. There are still a lot of unknowns around particularly liquid biofuels and biofuel blends. And those unknowns may never change because we won't always know where that blend has come from, what its emissions are, how much it might be displacing people or increasing food prices outside of Vermont. And while I value how much attention was paid to low-income Vermonters, moderate-income Vermonters, and renters, I very much appreciate that in this bill. I think we also need to set an intention around our global responsibility in terms of climate change. As Senator McCormick said yesterday, we have a global responsibility. This is about climate change. And, given that, I really feel that the Climate Council in many ways was hamstrung around equity issues. Its charge was specifically reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And as some folks may know, I was involved in a process, as I'm sure many of you were, to build equity considerations into the Climate Council after it left the building.
I want to go home.
Okay.
Do a test, and this doesn't seem to be directed at the amendment. It might be appropriate on the floor.
So why don't we go into the amendment then?
Sure.
So the first, and Senator Polina, did you want to say anything broadly before we go into the amendment?
Just that part of my concern has been from the start is that providing the PUC with the authority to do all this work and come up with a plan. And I just think these amendments actually set some parameters which would make us feel more comfortable with the direction that we're going to go in, because it would give some parameters to the PUC around these issues. In terms of the first one about heat credits from low and moderate income families, specifically in the form of sufficiency of other fossil fuel reduction technology, obvious that the cheapest fuel is the fuel that you don't ever buy, that you don't need. Efficiency is number one priority. And I think that if we're going to really say that we want to get low, moderate income people away from the volatility of the energy market, efficiency and weatherization is the way to go. And I think that this applies, this is what that's meant to apply.
That's right. And so just above that, the first instance of amendment, it felt important to have a definition for sustainably sourced biofuel. So that is borrowed language from the UN sustainability principles. And I imagine that would go in the definition section, but I'll turn it over to Ellen when we're done to talk about where these things live or any of those details. You heard from Senator Polina essentially the intent behind the second instance of amendment. The third instance of amendment is probably the one that has the most, it would generate the most conversation and discussion. And it is a cap on the number of credits that can go to liquid biofuels and renewable natural gas. As you may know, right now New Hampshire has a 5% cap on renewable natural gas as experimentation happens with understanding its impact. And
a cap on the liquid volume of the fuel.
The credit system, I feel like you know better than I do, is a little more complicated than liquid volume. You're assigning different credit values to different fuels already.
We are directing people smarter than us
Yes.
to look at the fuels, measure their volume, and how much carbon went into producing the fuel. So there are a variety of measurements. And I don't, how does this 10%, is this by volume or by?
It's just a 10% cap on the number of credits. So number of credits for liquid.
So the
I'll check that out,
value.
by the way.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And this also, understanding that things like biofuels and renewable natural gas are a transition from our existing infrastructure to future infrastructure, it has a sunset on those as part of the clean heat measures in 2030. The fourth instance of amendment on the back page is ensuring, as I looked at the idea of impacts on food costs, I wanted to make sure that we were looking globally at the impact on food costs. That's been a major concern with biofuels, particularly ethanol, is that when you take land out of food production or value crops differently for their fuel potential, that can skyrocket food prices. California has looked really deeply into, they put such a high incentive on certain fuel production out of crops that they had to really tamp that down quickly. Otherwise, it changes the global marketplace in terms of farmers just starting to produce food crops that are now for fuel, and what that does to the global economy when California does that. So I feel like some of their safeguards have been really critical. Fifth, there was, when we look at the overall calculation of the technical advisory group, what they're doing to calculate the life cycle and the relative costs and benefits of each fuel, it felt important to have an agricultural expert in that group, which to my knowledge, there wasn't when there was sustainability, climate change, heating fuels, but not necessarily agriculture, which I think is a big part of some of these fuel sources when it comes to methane and comes to liquid biofuel.
But we don't name individuals to the tag. We let them draw on whatever areas of expertise they need. So because we talk about land use impacts on foods, et cetera, I would count on the PUC to be reasonable and think that if they're going to examine that aspect, which they're required to, that they would take someone who would understand the notion that you're talking about.
There were a lot of other elements spelled out of expertise, and it just felt like agriculture was missing from that list of expertise that someone would draw from. I certainly trust our PUC. I think a lot of folks externally want to make sure they have something to hang their hat on and language that they can build in so that an agricultural expert does make it on.
There is language about land use and food impacts in the sustainability section. So anyway, let's keep going because unfortunately, this would have the difficulty is that we have two other bills that we had already scheduled to work. This is third reading. The bill's been out of committee for 2 weeks. It's an awkward time to receive a substantial amendment to the bill.
Well, I think some of these pieces might be hard to consider in terms of a big shift in direction. Some, I think, are language that really help us clarify our North Star around what we're trying to accomplish. I think they can be considered in each different instance of amendment, depending on, how friendly or unfriendly they are perceived to be. I did want to get through the last two quickly. I do worry that the Equity Advisory Group, everything I saw about their charge only allowed them to look at fuel prices and the impact on low-income Vermonters. I understand that that's generally the PUC's charge, but when you're creating an Equity Advisory Group, they should be able to look more broadly at these fuel sources and their impact on equity overall, not just on fuel prices for low-income Vermonters. And finally, I was wondering why and concerned by the idea that the report back seemed to specifically leave out subdivision, or so it specifically left out section 838C, which is the environmental impact statement that is required in statute. So that was left out as what would be required to be reported back. And I didn't know if that was intentional or accidentally omitted, but that seems really important to get that report back on the environmental impact before we move ahead with approving rulemaking. So, I understand that some of these might not make it all the way. I do think there's a mix of things that are hopefully able to be considered on short notice, and others that, I'm prepared we're prepared to understand that we think this is important to raise to you, and we think caps or sunsets would be a really helpful way to make sure that we set our intention in statute before giving this over to the PUC. But I do hope you don't throw out the entire amendment because of things that would be considered in the short term to be difficult to implement.
Right. Well, we have 7 instances of amendment, and we're in essence almost out of time. So let's thank you for that introduction, and I would ask counsel to help us look at how these insert briefly.
Do you want? So you're calling Ellen up?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yeah, do you want me to just sit here? You guys want
I'm happy to move. You can have the nice chair back. Okay.
I also, just so you know, I have to go to the committee.
Sure, yes, yeah, I could.
I don't be insulted by you.
Sure, Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. So I think Senator Rahm still did a really good job inserting them, but just to orient you, yes, the first instance of amendment is going in the definition section. The second instance of amendment is being added to the low and moderate income section of the bill in the equity section, which is 8123D. The third instance of amendment is being added to the clean heat credit section, as it's establishing limits on what types of credits can be used. The fourth instance of amendment is being added to the section on the tag. And that one is being added to one of the part of their the list of duties for the tag, and so it's just adding the word globally. So that sentence in it's on page 17. If you're looking at the bill, the list of duties for the tag include number 3, periodically assessing and reporting to the PUC on the sustainability of the production of clean heat measures by considering factors including, and the last one on the list is impacts on food costs. So it's adding impacts on food costs globally. The fifth instance of amendment is adding to the list of skills and expertise that members of the tags should have, and one of those would be regenerative agriculture. Number 6 is amending the, oh, there's a typo. There is a typo at number 6, and I can fix that quickly. But number 6 is being added to the equity advisory group. So it's amending number 3 of their duties, and it's changing it to read, identifying actions needed to provide better service to and mitigate the impacts on equity for the Vermonters and global citizens from the fuel choices made as part of the Clean Heat Standard. And then finally, in the implementation section, in the list of elements of the APA that need to be complied with, is adding the the environmental impact statement to the list. It was omitted, and I think in crafting that language originally, there's a report that the PUC also has to file at the same time that includes economic analysis and modeling. So I think that was part of the thought, but certainly you could add this requirement back in if you want the formal LPART environmental impact statement.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, may I ask you a quick question?
Yes, please.
Regarding, and I think this is for Senator Ron Costello, Senator Quinn, green hydrogen, that is renewable, correct?
So here, there is no definition to my knowledge right now in statute around green hydrogen.
Okay.
I understand green hydrogen to be when a process whereby if you have an excess of electricity, you can bring all of that energy to bear to create a energy-based, I don't know if it's liquid or gas form of hydrogen. It is just sounds pretty, like I don't know when we're going to have that much of an excess of electricity to create green hydrogen. I am open to that being either in or out, but when I understood the definition of green hydrogen, it still sounded like there were a lot of unknowns, and it was in an experimental phase of understanding how valuable that's going to be to the mix. And yeah, I don't know which systems it can be replaced within, like a liquid fuel system or a gas fuel system.
So to follow up on Senator Campion's question, if green hydrogen's produced with electricity, then I'm just wondering why that would perpetuate dependence on price volatile fuel, because electricity's been very steadily priced because it's a regulated form of energy.
I'm certainly open to taking that particular piece out. It just sounded like it was not equal to existing fuel sources where a lot of things are known about their price stability. Green hydrogen still takes a high amount of electricity to create. So the committee might have more information on how close we are to a stable form of green hydrogen in the state that would not be price volatile for folks. But I just heard a lot of unknowns around green hydrogen.
Well, and I think part of the purpose of the tag is that we're recognizing that this is a rapidly changing field, the various forms of energy that are emerging, and that we start with an initial list, and then we realize that that list will evolve over time, and the values assigned to each fuel type will evolve over time. I mean, my concern is that it seems to prejudge that these will all be detrimental in some way, and I'm not sure that's a accurate statement.
The intention is not to prejudge, but to ensure that we're making proper assessments of where we are with knowns and unknowns about fuel sources before turning this process over for the next 2 years to another body. I think the more people trust our process, the more they will be willing to move into a new renewable energy future, without worrying about seeing an article about green hydrogen and it being, a deep unknown like we are seeing with biofuels and ethanol, and feeling like somehow we are putting the accelerator on that at the same level we are heat pumps and weatherization and efficiency, which are pretty tried and true, and a solid form of investment when you're talking about helping low-income people reduce their dependence on something that's unknown.
Yeah, I think rather than, I wouldn't call it detrimental necessarily. I would say that there are more unknowns and it's maybe more volatile than we'd like it to be, some of these things. The renewable natural gas, I mean, there's doubt, it's questionable whether there is such a thing, given the impact on production, transportation, and distribution, and fracking that goes along with natural gas.
Sure. Okay.
But I'd be happy to take out green hydrogen. It just seemed like it wasn't the best solution for.
The lead in with shall be in the form of efficiency and other fuel reducing technologies. So efficiency is really, I mean, in terms of efficient use of energy, period, we cover in the weatherization parts of the bill. So, but weatherization can only achieve roughly 20% of the greenhouse gas reductions we need. 2025, the other 75, 80 needs to come out of, stop burning stuff. Okay. The clean heat credits, so that the third instance of amendment, the 10% liquid biofuels and renewable natural gas. So do you know what percentage of Vermont's current fuel supply could be qualifies as liquid biofuels and renewable natural gas? For instance, we have methane digesters generating electricity. Some people might call that, a form of, or piped off the farm is in renewable natural gas going to Millbrae College, or I'm just wondering, does this sweep up landfill gas? Is that a renewable natural gas, landfill gas?
Yes, but is any of it being used for heating?
Well, in the case of Washington Electric Co-op, they have a generating station at the Coventry landfill. Or in the case of the farm in Salisbury, they have a generating, they're producing and cleaning, they're calling it renewable natural gas. It's coming from a methane digester. I'm just trying to figure out what portion of the portfolio already exists. Like, are we at 1%, 10%? We're already close. I don't know what the implications of assigning a 10% cap would be.
And it's not a cap on production, it's a cap on it being valued for credit as a clean form of heat. So, my sense was that this would really focus us on local projects that are, that are dynamic and being done right within our communities, and allow us to experiment with that until we know whether it's clean or not, rather than liquid biofuels can be a blend from essentially anywhere in the world, and we don't have a really good handle on how much of that is benefiting us locally and not leaving the state and causing chaos in other parts of the world on food, in terms of food prices and displacement. So it seemed like the cap would allow us to focus those credits on local projects that are more known to us in terms of the value that they're providing and shedding environmental spillover costs.
So I'll be honest, a lot of these are interesting ideas, and we've had discussions around many of these things. As a matter of fact, all of these things in the course of the development of the bill, which we spent months on. And I'm very reluctant to just make point edits to the bill without really slowing down, looking at how these fit in, thinking through the implications for other parts of the bill. It's a complex bill, and so I applaud the spirit of the edits, but process-wise, it's a very difficult way to try to edit the bill. We have no time for testimony. I wouldn't want to make changes without hearing from the people that we worked closely with for months to develop the bill that is on the floor right now. I don't know how other members of the committee feel about it. It's, again, some of them you might say, well, we could maybe add this particular one, but we have 2 other bills to act on today, and we have no time to vet these in terms of their consequences and in terms of how well they work with the other provisions already in the bill. So the only thing I can think of is if we go to conference, that it would buy a number of days to be able to look into this and maybe bring something to conference. But I don't see how we can investigate these prior to the floor today, honestly.
I understand some might create other unknowns in a larger, framework of credit values, et cetera. It is concerning to put out there sustainably sourced biofuels without even having a definition of what we mean by sustainably sourced. So I do hope that you can consider some of these amendments as potentially a way to make the bill clearer to your colleagues and to people who are, out there looking at this language and trying to make sure they understand what do we mean when we say sustainably sourced biofuels are right there alongside efficiency measures as something that is eligible for credit.
I appreciate the thrust of it and the questions and the intent, but again, to be direct about it, we could have done this 2 weeks ago, but we're between second and third reading right now.
Thank goodness, Mr. Chair, there's going to be hearings before the PUC to recommend, discuss, and promote many of the ideas we're hearing here this morning, and that's where the details will get ironed out.
Right. There is, to the point of, there is a great deal of, there's a very high requirement for meetings with interested parties throughout the community engagement section of the bill. The bill lists 12 meetings that are required. In addition, the PUC in their own testimony said they anticipated having at least another dozen. So I think there will, and then we have both the equity group as well as the TAG, which will be holding their own hearings in order to develop recommendations. So I honestly believe that these conversations will have a venue for real deep and thoughtful discussion. Definitely not interested in pushing these off. I'm just saying that to insert them now with sort of a foregone conclusion.
With respect, Mr. Chair, the Equity Advisory Group, to my knowledge, has only been, if you look at the charge, from my read of it, it is only able to look at fuel prices and their impact on low-income Vermonters. And those kinds of things in the process of the GWSA and Climate Council were often used to stop larger, broader discussions. Those are the kinds of things where if we look at Hydro Quebec and say, we're only talking about the impact of pricing, we're not looking at flooding tribal lands, then it shuts down a lot of conversation that's important to Vermonters when we talk about what equity means. So as we look at things through an environmental justice lens, it's very much a local to global zooming in and out of focus. And from my read of the Equity Advisory Group, which has the fuel dealers on it and other players, its still only charge is to look at fuel prices and its impact on low-income Vermonters, which generally to me seems to track with what the PUC's charge is. And I think the reason for having an equity advisory group should be so they can look at broader issues of equity as it relates to fuel sources, how that impacts Vermonters and how that impacts other people across the planet.
So, as this committee spent months on the environmental justice bill, I think we become more sensitive to the value of, how equity discussions ought to be structured. And I'm not debating that there's no potential for improvement. My thinking is that the other thing is this bill the program does not become a live program for 2.5 years. We've had numerous discussions in committee how even as the 23 and 24 sessions are underway, that we might well modify statute to change the program itself. Some of the requests will come from the legislature. Some may be based on requests from the PUC to us to enable them to do something better that they're currently not authorized in this first cut at the clean heat standard. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities before this comes live in 25 to make enhancements to the bill. So with that, though, we have counsel with us, and we have another bill that we need to move. So thank you, Senator Ram Himsdale, and thank you, Senator Polina. Thank you, Ms. Chakowski. Like to move to, sorry if it's,
Mr. Chairman, are you able to hear me?
yes.
Okay, I'm on. I can't get my picture up, but anyway, I got my voice. I would wish that the committee would take a more sympathetic view of Senator Ram Himsdale's proposal. I think anything we can do, even late in the game, to punch this bill up and make it a little more effective than it is, I welcome the opportunity.
Well, we'll circle back to this when we finish the bills we have to move and take a committee position before we adjourn committee today. Thanks, Senator McCormick.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate that, Senator McCormick. I appreciate the patience of the entire committee. There were lots of conversations, even if we didn't have an amendment to propose to you before today. I have heard the feedback of the committee. I'm sure Ellen is extremely busy, but if there are small surgical edits I can make to this to ensure that it's focused on things that feel like they can be considered before third reading and get that back to you all, I would like to do that, but I am looking at Ellen to make sure that's something that is possible.
Yeah, we have like 48 minutes.
Right, exactly.
I have to go down the hall. I appreciate you taking the time to listen and be part of this conversation. I hope you two are gonna feel okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Do you feel okay?
It's just like the flu right now, that's all.
Right. All right.
Okay.
Take care.
That's bad enough.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Dick has it too, or just Richie and Senator McCormick, do you have COVID as well?
No, I'm simply being cautious, and as we're speaking, I'm looking at my COVID test, and so far it's still
I'm
negative.
gonna do the test right now.
It's not quite 15 minutes. So
Okay, so with that, I'd like to go to Mr. O'Grady, who has a draft of 446 for us to look at. So as forecast yesterday, I worked with Mr. O'Grady to take 501, the depackaging bill, and make some changes to that, as well as then bring it into the miscellaneous A&R bill as an amendment. So Mr. O'Grady, if you could walk us through, that would be great.
Sure. Senator McDonald asked me to tell you that he just left to get tested. And if he's positive, he will participate from home.
Okay, thank you for that. Dropping like flies here.
I'm still here and feeling like $1 million, guys. Nothing's taking me down.
So
This is like
What draft should we be looking at, please?
you should have 446 draft 1.2.
Okay, thank you. All right, I got it on mine, thanks.
Okay. So the first change is because you are amending a bill that passed last year. I went through all the sections to ensure, all the sections in the underlying bill to ensure that nothing in those statutes had changed. and that none of those sections had passed. In fact, section 4 and 446 has passed. It was in the big bill last year. It was the provision that increases the maximum amount that can be spent from the environmental contingency fund from 100,000 to 350,000. I assumed you did not want to do that again.
Correct, thank you.
So that was removed. Then the second instance of amendment adds H501 with amendments to the bill in sections 24 through 28. 24 is the moratorium on the permitting of new solid waste facility certifications for food to packaging. It is basically the same as what you have seen before. There is a change on page 291 to the internal section reference because it's no longer the standalone bill. It has to have those changes, those reference changes. Section 25 is the stakeholder group. This is a little bit more clear and kind of transparent than what the House had passed. It directs the Secretary of Natural Resources to convene a collaborative stakeholder process prior to July 1, 2022, and make recommendations on proper management of packaged organic materials, including whether the organics management hierarchy should apply, whether A&R should modify its policy around source separation, any recommendation on the proper use of depackagers and the management of organic waste. It has a specific list of participants to be appointed by the Secretary of Natural Resources, a representative from the Agency of Ag, a food waste composter, a farm that allows animals to forage food waste, a representative of a company operating a depackaging facility, a representative from the retailers and grocers. Then there was a new, actually it might not have been new, it might have been in previous versions, but dropped out at some point, a representative from a company that anaerobically digests food waste, and then a representative from a food product manufacturing company in Vermont. They submit their recommendations to you on or before January 15, 2023. Section 26 is a study by the Agency of Natural Resources in consultation with the Agency of Ag, and they report to you regarding the prevalence of microplastics and PFAS in food waste and food packaging. The report shall include a list of organics management facilities certified in the state, a summary of the organics management system, and a summary of existing data on the levels of microplastics and plastics and material produced from organics materials, a summary of the methods used domestically and internationally by jurisdictions with physical contamination standards to evaluate the percentage by weight of physical contamination present in the material produced by food packaging facilities, identification of data gaps, to effective management, recommendations on management changes that will reduce the levels of microplastics, implementation of the food residuals hierarchy, or the current requirements around source separation of organic material from food waste, and if possible, in light of the data, a recommendation for a standard methodology for testing microplastics and a health-based standard for microplastics. Then you get to the rulemaking. It is a required rulemaking. You see that page 5, line 8, it says the Secretary shall adopt by rule requirements. But then what requirements or what specifically will be in the rules is a may. So the rules may establish management standards for the operation of a food waste management facility. They may prohibit certain containers and packaging from being managed in a food waste facility. They may establish standards for hand source separation instead of mechanical packaging. They may establish requirements for implementation of the food residual hierarchy. They may place restrictions on the types of food that may be managed at a food management facility. They may adopt a testing methodology for microplastics. They may adopt a standard for microplastics from food waste management facilities that protects human health or natural resources, and they may, at the recommendation of the Secretary of Ag, adopt a standard for microplastics or PFAS from food management facilities that protects animal health, agricultural soils, or other agricultural resources. Then you'll see an important part of the rulemaking, page 6, line 8, the secretary shall not initiate rulemaking until the recommendations required by sections 25 and 26 are submitted to the General Assembly. So that's until after the stakeholder group issues its recommendations and after the PFAS study by A&R. So basically, it's a data gathering process for 2 years before A&R starts rulemaking. And on page 6, section 28, the moratorium in section 24 shall be repealed on the date that the rules required under section 27 are adopted and in effect. And then the effective dates are changed to basically incorporate the 501 sections and their effect on passage. The rest of the underlying 446 goes into effect July 1, 2022.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Grady. So to the committee, that last section 27 on rulemaking, the concept there, I think, is that the way I think of how we have this sort of interesting blend of shall and may is that we want rules to be written, but we don't want to prejudge what they must do, because we won't have the studies completed ahead of time. So if we had shall all the way throughout, we might be requiring rulemaking on things that once we've done the studies, we would do different rules. So that's the reason for the sort of the split between shall and may. And I think that also reflected some concerns of the A&R that if we required all those rules, that we may not be well enough informed to do all of them either, because it's an emerging, we're learning more. And as Dr. Roy was saying, there's a lot more to learn about microplastics getting into the environment and the other contaminants traveling with them. At the same time, I don't think any of us is content to sort of sit back and say, we'll passively watch what happens. I think we'd like to gather the information and do our best to manage it proactively. So that's for me, sort of the editorial position on it. Any committee questions for Mr. O'Grady or discussion about 501? I don't know if people feel like we found the right balance between study and rulemaking at this point.
My only question, and I apologize, I just don't think I have the right version in front of me. But I thought I just had the 4-page.
It should be draft 1.2 of H446.
Oh, right. Okay. All right. That I did that. Okay. Got it. It was incorporated in. Got it. Okay. Thank you.
So this would be an amendment to the excuse me, the housekeeping bill, the A&R housekeeping bill, and we would be adding that on. So I don't know if the committee at this point is, I think the housekeeping bill was non-controversial entirely, and I didn't feel like we were quite there yet on 501. I don't know if people are now feeling comfortable adding this to the underlying bill and moving it forward.
So moved.
Okay, so that would be a motion to amend H446 with draft number 1.2, date stamped 4/28/22, time stamped 5:30 p.m. And since we're Senator Campion, you're the other one in the room. Can you take the physical record for this, please?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Any further discussion before we vote to amend? Senator Westman.
I'm trying to catch up with which draft it is and where it is. So
okay. It's on today's page, web page under Mr. O'Grady's name, and it's draft 1.2 of H446.
Want to just give it a minute, Mr. Chair, for Senator West?
Yeah.
And Senator McCormick, I just want to make sure you've been able to pull up it's a little tricky with all of us spread around, pull up that document that Mr. O'Grady just walked through.
Unfortunately, I have not been. I'm using my iPad. I wanted to use my iPad for some, and I don't have the internet connection, and my landlady is not here, so I'm on my phone. But as you say, this is basically housekeeping, so I'm prepared to go with the committee on it.
Okay, thank you.
Hmm.
Senator Westman, take your time, take a look.
No, I'm almost there. It looks mostly housekeeping. I'm ready.
Okay. With that, then, Mr. Clerk, could you call the roll on the motion to amend?
Sure. Senator McCormick,
Yes.
Senator McDonald, absent. Senator Westman,
Yes.
Senator Campion, yes. Senator Bray.
Yes. Okay, thank you. And and now we need a motion favorably H446 as so amended.
So moved.
Thank you. Any committee discussion? Okay. Clerk will call the roll, please.
Senator McCormick,
Yes.
Senator McDonald, absent. Senator Campion, yes. Senator Westman,
Yes.
Senator Bray.
Yes. Thank you, committee. Thank you, Mr. O'Grady. Let's leave it open for Senator McDonald. Hope he comes
Okay.
back testing negative still. I'm feeling spry. With that, we have one other order of business for the morning, and that is the the Senate Agriculture Committee has reviewed the interbasin transfer, the water bill, and made a proposal of amendment. Mr. O'Grady, let me see, I'm going to go back to the committee webpage and
In the
pull it up.
bathroom.
So I should be looking for.
You should be looking for H466 draft 4.3 dated 4/28/2022.
Great, got it. Thank you. So if you could walk us through, I suppose, focusing on what has changed since it left us. I don't know if they're sprinkled throughout or limited to a section here and there.
They're sprinkled throughout. So I'll just walk through the changes if you don't mind.
Yes, please.
So page 4 is the first change. It is in line 15 in the definition of surface water. Basically, this is what is not a surface water.
Yep.
Your language had said constructed offstream farm ponds or other offstream impoundments that are used for irrigation or watering of livestock. They added irrigation or farming.
Okay.
Should I move on?
Yeah, so the one I'm reading though, sorry, 4/28/22 timestamp 7:09 a.m. My version that you just cited, line 15 on mine reads irrigation for farming or watering of livestock.
Yeah.
Okay, so I misunderstood. I thought you said they just stopped at the word farming.
No, that your language had said impoundments that are used for irrigation or watering of livestock.
Oh, I see.
Their language says that are used for irrigation for farming or watering of livestock.
Got it. Thank you. All right.
Then page 6. Line 5, there was a typo. It should say water withdrawals that are consistent with section 1001 and chapter 41 of this title. Should I move on?
Yes, please.
And then on page 7, I just wanted to highlight that the registration and reporting is the same as yours, the same thresholds, the same time periods, etc. And then on page 8, there is a change in the reporting methods. You had provided a specific reporting method for those who were basically farming, withdrawing for irrigation or livestock watering. That specific method is removed because on page 9, line 4, surface water withdrawals for irrigation for farming, livestock watering, or other uses for farming are accepted from reporting to ANR. Should I move on?
Yes, please. Thank you.
And you can go to page 11, similar exception from the future permitting program. On line 18, page 11, line 18, surface water withdrawals for irrigation for farming, livestock watering, or other uses for farming would be accepted from the permit that ANR would establish in the future under its rules.
Okay. Any questions? All right. Senator McCormick?
Well, what is the timing on this? Because I'm reporting the underlying bill. We're not bringing it up today on the floor, are we?
No, it's on notice today.
On notice. Okay, yeah. I would like the weekend to go over all this and think about how to. I think basically the Agriculture Committee has to present their version, but I would like to have an understanding of it as I report the underlying bill. And Michael, I'd appreciate perhaps if you could just email me a side by side of what they're doing to our bill.
Sure thing.
Okay, thanks.
Great. All right. Fair enough. It'd be nice to have a few days to study it before the floor. All
Yeah,
right.
it helps. Makes a better report, doesn't it?
Yeah. So let's go on, Mr. O'Grady. Thank you.
So the next change is on page 14. At the bottom of the page, line 17, there is a requirement that ANR report to you annually beginning in February of 2023 with the data submitted to the secretary as part of so they submit to you the surface water withdrawal data that they receive. So you're informed about the scope of withdrawal in the state.
And the farm data that goes to Agency of Agriculture is forwarded on to ANR so that it's going to be comprehensive.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
So the next change is on page 16. And this is where page 16, line 9, the agency with surface withdrawals for irrigation for farming and livestock watering and other farming purposes are reported to the Agency of Agriculture annually when they withdraw 10,000 gallons or more than a 24-hour period in the preceding calendar year, or 150,000 gallons or more over any 30-day period in the preceding calendar year. So the report goes to the Agency of Ag. They report an estimate of the total amount of water withdrawn in the preceding calendar year, the location of the withdrawals, the daily maximum withdrawal, the date of each daily maximum withdrawal, and any other information related to surface water withdrawal required. Secretary of Ag, and then you will see subsection C, beginning February 1, 2023, and annually thereafter, the Secretary of Ag submits to the Secretary of Natural Resources the data collected under the reporting to the Agency of Agriculture.
Okay, great. Was there discussion on the sharing of data provision? One of the things that ANR had said that they wanted to be able to have the secretary issuing guidance so that they got apples and apples reports, not acre inches and cubic feet and all the rest. Was there a discussion about sort of coming to a standard data format so that what ag collects will port over gracefully to what A&R is collecting and needs?
Not that I was there before.
Okay, all right, all right. Any committee questions for Mr. O'Grady on this one?
So in short, they're going to report to ag, and ag is going to transfer the information, and they still keep our 10,000 to 50,000 limits the same.
Yeah, yes, and then ag would be accepted from any future A&R permit. This is basically the system that's used in New York. In New York, everyone that exceeds the threshold has to get a permit except agriculture. If agriculture exceeds the permit, they have to register and report, but they don't need a permit. So
Okay.
this is basically the New York structure, but with much lower thresholds.
But right now we don't require any permits either.
That's for ag, right, for anyone right now, that's correct.
For anybody right now. It's a future decision whether or not we would require permits.
Well, no, you've given A&R the ability in rule to establish a permitting system.
Yeah, but right now there's no, and it purely for right now is reporting.
Correct.
Okay. And so I didn't notice it. I think you said, let me make sure I heard this correctly, Mr. O'Grady, that we're also specifying that any future A&R rules will not apply to agricultural uses.
The permitting program will not apply to agriculture, irrigation for farming, or livestock watering.
Okay, all right. All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, do we want to accept? Do we want to accept that? Yeah. Do we want to accept that?
Well, given that we have no permits at all right now, and we have kind of a perennial struggle between A&R and ag over water. To me, this seems like a way to at least get the surveying done, establish a permitting program for everything, and it would leave to coming back to the possibility of saying that actually one permitting program should apply to everything if future General Assembly felt that way. But given how little we have now, I'm seeing the compromise as a way of getting started being a reasonable compromise and an important thing to get going. But yeah, I share your concern. So I think that what we would be,
We do a straw poll, Mr. Chair, is that what you're thinking?
exactly, we just need to have a position to report on the floor next week on how our committee views the report of the Agriculture Committee. So we don't have Senator McDonald here, and let me just, so for the straw poll, can you do it as though we're roll calling?
Oh, sure.
Please, thank you, Senator Campion.
So Senator McCormick?
Holding my nose, yes, we can accept.
McDonald, Senator Westman?
Yes.
Senator Campion's yes, Senator Bright?
Yes.
Okay.
So we're at 401. Thank you, Mr. O'Grady. Thank you, committee. And we'll see if we get Senator McDonald back. So Senator Campion, yeah, if you could keep an eye out for Senator McDonald and ask him to check in and just participate in those votes we had this morning, that would be great. With that, we have finished our business for the